German Chancellor Angela Merkel has held talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy in Kiev. The two discussed an end to the conflict with Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. Germany is a key ally of Ukraine's, but there are also tensions over the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Kiev is strongly opposed to the route, which will ship gas directly from Russia to Germany, depriving Ukraine of both transit fees and geopolitical leverage, and potentially allowing Russia to cut off Ukraine's gas while keeping Western Europe supplied.
16 years, dozens of bilateral visits and 4 Ukrainian presidents. Angela Merkel is certainly no stranger to this part of the world. She came to office just after the first Maidan revolution swept a new president to power, but Ukraine only really came to dominate Germany's diplomatic agenda in 2014. When pro-European protesters once again took to Kiev's Maidan Square and brought another pro-Russian government down. Soon, former President Viktor Yanukovych fled to Moscow, and the EU and Russia were on a collision course. Within weeks, Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and began supporting pro-Russian separatists in the Donbas region. Full-scale open warfare in Europe was a reality for the first time since the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. Thousands lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands of people were forced to flee their homes. Negotiations late into the night and countless calls between Kiev, Moscow, Brussels and Washington. Angela Merkel was at the forefront of the shuttle diplomacy that prevented a local conflict from escalating. She was also determined to make Russia pay for flouting international law in Ukraine. Most analysts are certain that without Merkel's lobbying, EU sanctions against Russia would never have been passed. But seen from Kiev, this was also a time of mixed messages from Germany. Just months after the last tank battle in Donbas, in June 2015, Nord Stream 2 was announced. A further gas pipeline linking Russia and Germany through the Baltic Sea would allow the Kremlin to completely bypass Ukraine's pipelines. Not only would Ukraine lose billions in annual transit fees, but also a key deterrent to further Russian military intervention in Ukraine. Ukraine's leaders hoped that US pressure would stop the project, but when President Joe Biden withdrew sanctions after a meeting with Merkel in July 2021, it was clear that the battle was lost. A dream that Ukraine's leaders haven't given up on is NATO membership, or something close to it. But Angela Merkel was never the leader they could look to for support. She repeatedly vetoed NATO plans to give Kiev any overt security guarantees, let alone membership, for fear of antagonizing Russia. As Angela Merkel makes her final visit to Ukraine, the conflict in Donbas is still no closer to a negotiated resolution. The German Chancellor will be remembered in Kiev as a leader who made stabilizing Ukraine a priority, but who also often disappointed her Ukrainian counterparts by her refusal to push back harder against Russia.
Well, for more, let's bring in DW's Nick Connolly, who is standing by in Kiev. Hello to you, Nick. So you were following the press conference. What did the two leaders say?
Well, this was essentially about two things. This was about security and Ukraine's ongoing tensions with Russia, security in Donbas, and about energy, that Nord Stream 2 pipeline through the Baltic Sea you mentioned. And from a Ukrainian perspective, those two things are intrinsically linked. The Ukrainians saying that if Germany commissions this pipeline, then Russia basically will have a free hand to up the pressure on Ukraine to destabilize this country, because up till now they have been dependent on security here in Ukraine to supply their customers and earn those crucial billions from European customers. From Angela Merkel, we heard a kind of personal note of disappointment that those negotiations year after year on Donbas through the Minsk format, that they hadn't achieved more. You have to say that Russia has handed out about 500,000 passports in that region to people living there, and is now encouraging people living there with Russian passports to take part in Russian elections. So no real sign that those are going to come under Ukrainian control anytime soon. And from Volodymyr Zelenskiy, there was more of his criticism of this pipeline. He called it a weapon that Germany was needlessly basically handing over to the Russians. He was sceptical that the compensatory mechanisms would work, that Ukraine would get much in return, and basically said that the sanctions that are meant to happen if Russia does weaponize energy were unenforceable. So very difficult to see any closening of the positions there.
Well, it was just 2 days ago that Angela Merkel had a surprisingly warm welcome from Vladimir Putin when she was in Moscow. Just how welcome is the German Chancellor in Kiev?
Well, there were obviously warm words from the host, from Volodymyr Zelenskiy, and recognition that Angela Merkel has invested a huge amount of political capital in Ukraine down the years, especially in those last 7 years since Russia annexed Crimea and began supporting those separatists in Donbass. But there was no overlooking those tensions, and the atmospherics weren't particularly relaxed. Volodymyr Zelenskiy coming back to that energy topic time and time again. Germany has said it will invest in renewables here in Ukraine to try and dampen the blow from Ukraine losing that gas transit, and would try and prevent Russia from weaponizing energy. But there was also talk of military aid. The Ukrainians would like Germany to support Ukraine's military, as the US and the UK are doing, maybe help rebuild its Black Sea fleet. But Germany staying very, very quiet about that. No real willingness to provide Ukraine with lethal weapons. And so there's a real disappointment here in Kiev among people who maybe are expecting more from Germany, that Germany, to their mind, isn't willing to get off the fence and take sides for Ukraine, and is trying to, basically keep its role as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. That's something that is frustrating people here in Ukraine as this conflict continues.
DW's Nick Connolly reporting for us from Kiev. Thanks so much.